Ancient Chinese art. The historical and cultural heart of China is the land watered by the three great rivers, the Yellow River, the Yangtze River, and the Zai River. Neolithic cultures emerged in this area, and of course they were agriculturally based. They grew rice and millet. Farming in China developed independently before 5000 BCE, so independently from the Near East and Europe. During the Neolithic period, cities began to emerge, and the earliest known palace has been dated to about 2000 BCE. The Bronze Age came to China in the second millennium BCE. This also developed independently in China. Dynasties shape China's history. The first dynasties came to power in the Bronze Age. The Shang dynasty is one of the first that we can historically confirm, and they ruled from around 1700 to 1100 BCE. During this time, they had a very highly stratified society. Now, a dynasty claimed its power by claiming to be the intermediaries between the supernatural and human realms. So like they go between people, between the supernatural and the human realms, just like we talked about in the Near East. During this time, during the Shang dynasty, there was a chief Shang deity, and his name was Shangdi. He is the great ancestor. Nature and fertility spirits were also honored, and regular sacrifices were made to keep the spirits of dead ancestors alive so they might help the living. Shang priests communicated with the supernatural world through oracle bones, and that's what we're looking at here. This is an oracle bone. An oracle bone is an animal bone or a piece of tortoise shell inscribed with a question and then heated until it cracks. And the way that it cracks is interpreted as an answer. Oracle bones contain the earliest known form of Chinese writing, and it's an ancestor of modern Chinese characters. So archaeologists have discovered some Shang tombs. We know, based on looking at these tombs, that the Shang dynasty, the people who lived during this time, were a warrior culture of great riches and also violence. Many humans and animals were sacrificed to accompany the deceased in one tomb. So they did practice a form of human sacrifice, sort of like a grave offering. We found chariots with skeletons of their horses and drivers. In another tomb, we find dozens of human skeletons lining the passage to the central burial chamber. The tombs contain extreme riches, such as gold, silver, ivory, jade, and bronze vessels. So they actually are pretty large. There's this enormous scale of Shang burials, which shows us that this is a society that was very wealthy and very powerful, especially the ruling class, that they were able to accumulate this quantity of treasure and also human sacrifice. You have to be pretty powerful to evoke human sacrifice. It also shows the culture's reverence for the dead. Clearly, they were greatly honored if they were accompanied by all these grave goods and human sacrifices. Now, one of the things that we find in these burials are these bronze vessels, which we're looking at here. These bronze vessels are connected with shamanic practices, and they served as containers for ritual offerings of food, wine, and some are derived from early pottery forms. Others seem to reproduce wooden containers. So perhaps the form began as a pottery or a wooden form, and then as bronze work came to be used, they decided to switch it over to bronze, which was more of an elite material. Nevertheless, some of them are purely sculptural, and others take the form of fantastic composite animals. So what we're looking at is these bronze vessels, and they are called feng dings. They're from, well, the one that we're looking at here is from the 12th century BCE, and it is bronze, and it's a square vessel with 4 legs. This is one of 100 vessels recovered from the royal tombs near the last of the Shang capitals. This one is one of the largest ever recovered. It weighs about 240 pounds and is about 2 feet tall. It is typical of the Shang style. We see surface decoration with complex imagery based on animal forms. We think that it is related to these zoomorphic masked faces, which we call totai. And some relate these masked faces to dragon imagery. Here we see, on this one over here, we see a large deer's head on the center of each side and images of the deer repeated on the legs. I know it's hard to make out in this image, and the rest of the surface. We also see bird-like creatures and dragons and other fantastic creatures. Might be related to the hunting life of the Shang dynasty. Over here we see a more composite dragon-looking figure, really this more totai kind of relationship, this masked face. Shang creatures are sometimes fearsome, strange. They provoke a sense of mystery, evoking the Shang's attitudes towards the supernatural world. And you can see they're very geometrically based and very stylized. You will actually get to see one of these in the collection of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts if you get to go there. The Zhou dynasty conquered the Shang by 1100 BCE from western China. And at this time, feudal society developed, with nobles related to the ruling king over a number of small states. During this time, we also see the worship of Taiyin, or heaven, a supreme deity, and the king ruled as the son of Taiyin. Taiyin is the personal cult of Chinese sovereigns until the end of the imperial rule in the early 20th century. The first 300 years of the dynasty was stable and peaceful, but by 771 BCE, nomadic tribes began to cause trouble. They rocked the Zhou and moved the capital to the east. The states grew increasingly independent, and Zhou kings really ended up only having nominal allegiance under this feudal system. Small states began to be swallowed up by their neighbors, and the states were at war from about 402 to 221 BCE. During this time, there was a lot of social unrest due to all this kind of warfare, and Confucianism was founded. The Chinese empire is established under the Qin dynasty from 221 to 206 BCE. This is when the state of the Qin launched a military campaign that led to its triumph over other states by 221 BCE. This is the first time in history that China was united under a single ruler, and its first emperor was Shi Huangdi. So I'm not going to talk about him specifically. We're kind of going to skip over this here in the lecture because I do have the video posted for you to watch, and I think that video is really interesting. But this is going to be his tomb. And I'll just show you a couple of pictures, and then I want you to watch the video. So the Han Dynasty is going to overthrow the Qin in about 206 BCE. And they introduce a period of peace, prosperity, and stability. During this time, the Silk Road is established. Also, Confucianism continues to develop, and Confucianism has concerns with the human world, and its goal is the attainment of peace, with an emphasis on social order and respect for authority. So, this is actually embraced by Han rulers. It basically teaches you to respect authority, so they're down with that. They made it their official imperial philosophy. It remains the state ideology for China for more than 2,000 years, until the end of the imperial world. It is based on the teachings of Confucius, who was a scholar and a teacher. Another philosophy religion that emerged during this time is Taoism. And Taoism is a kind of nature mysticism that brings together many ancient Chinese ideas regarding humankind and the universe. The Tao means the way or the path. It's a very poetic philosophy, and usually includes ancestor veneration. So the reason that I introduce you very, very briefly to these two philosophies or religions is because they do appear in Han art. So this is an example of Confucius art in the Wu family shrine. This is actually a rubbing of a stone relief from the Wu family shrine, which was built in 151 CE. So basically what someone's done, maybe you did this when you were a kid, is you had a piece of paper and some charcoal and or chalk or whatever, and you put the piece of paper against a textured surface and you rubbed the charcoal or chalk, and it made an impression of what the image beneath it, or the texture beneath it. So that's what someone has done. And this actually, this Wu family shrine has a really interesting history. In fact, these rubbings from the Wu family shrine had been circulating since about 960 to about 1279, sometime in that during that time. So they've been circulating all over the place. And nobody knew actually where this Wu family shrine was. They didn't know where it came from. Finally, some archaeologists and amateur archaeologists in 1786 discovered that they actually were from this particular cemetery. So we were able to connect it to this actual Wu family shrine. Anyway, so these reliefs are depicting scenes meant to teach Confucius themes like respect for the emperor, piety, and wifely devotion. Taoist motifs also appear, and figures from traditional myths and legends are all mixed in together. So we have all this iconography from these different philosophies and religions and legends, and this is a characteristic of Han art. What we see in this image is it shows a two-story building of a woman, with women in the upper level and men in the lower level. The central figure in both floors, so here we go, right here and right here. So the women are up here, the men are down here. So these central figures are receiving gifts. The scene seems to be about homage to the first emperor of the Han Dynasty, and that's indicated by his larger size. Birds and small figures are on the roof. So up here, you can see the birds and small figures on the roof. So here's the building right here, and then here are the birds and small figures. On the left, we have this legendary archer, and he shoots one of the sun crows. You can see the sun crows. So the legend around him is that originally there were 10 sun crows of the 10 suns, and so he shot them down so that the earth would not dry up, so they wouldn't have too many suns. So he shoots down all but one. Then we have this lower register here, which depicts a procession. So we have more dignitaries arriving to this reception. And then here are all the people bringing goods to the emperor and his wife, or the ruler and his wife. There's a clear focus on the human realm, unlike what we saw in earlier art. And the composition conveys the importance of the emperor as the holder of the mandate of heaven and illustrates the fundamental Confucius themes of social order and decorum. So it's basically showing you how you should behave if you were to encounter the emperor, among other things. So it's kind of displaying his prestige and also connecting him to these philosophies and different religions. Unfortunately, no Han architecture remains, only ceramic models. Here we see a tomb model of a house from the 1st to mid-2nd century CE, and this was recovered in a tomb. It was provided for the dead to use in the afterlife, and it represents a typical Han dwelling. We see that we have this kind of 4-story building with a watchtower at the top, and you can see that the walls are gorgeously and vibrantly painted. The family would have lived on the upper stories, and then the lower stories, like the pigs and the oxen, would have lived in the lower stories. And this is kind of a gated entrance, and in the interior you have like a courtyard. They use the bracketing system, which is this right here. It's an architectural element that projects from a wall to support a horizontal part of a building, such as beams or eaves of a roof. This one supports rather broad eaves of its tiled roof. Bracketing is a standard element of Eastern Asian architecture in private homes, palaces, and temples.